People think that client attraction is an event. In reality, client attraction is an evolutionary process. So Google actually came out with this study recently, and it's called the 7-11-4 rule. A consumer requires 7 hours of content consumed from you, 11 different touch points, and 4 different locations. So you have to put a process in place that strategically engineers that. And then also not just obsessing over top line revenue, but actually looking at profit and more specifically cash flow. Because if somebody wants to come in and acquire your business and they want to buy your business, they want to look at current cash flow and they want to look at future cash flow. So then you want to zoom out and be like, okay, how do I reverse engineer XYZ cash flow? People think that scale means growing bigger and faster. Scale actually means multiplication, replication. Now, sometimes people may think that looks like 30, 40, 50 person team. But no, because the goal is to have a lean, self-led team, not just a big team, because a lot of times we try to build a big team just based on ego and stuff like that.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited for this one because we got somebody that I know you've probably seen him before, either on your favorite podcast or perhaps you might have seen one of his ads. We got the one and only Marquel Russell in the building. What's going on, fam?
What's going on, bro? I'm excited to be here, man. I'm excited to be here.
Hey, listen, man, you're somebody that when we think about people who have been crushing it from a client attraction space, really getting right in front of you, the audience is seeing your face. They kind of got an idea, but I want the audience right now to get more of an idea of who you were prior to you jumping into business, prior to you being out here on all these different social media platforms. Take us back to like the young Marquel growing up. Where are you from?
I'm from Atlanta, right? And I always tell people, man, I'm a dope boy at heart, right? So that was where I first started getting traction. I actually dropped out of high school in 10th grade. Started selling drugs. Like everybody who I looked up to early on was like dope boys and drug dealers, and that's what I aspired to be like. So I went that particular route. Ended up dropping out of school, going full time in the streets, and then start going to jail. That kind of comes with it. And then when I had my son, when I was 19, I kind of had a slight shift because my dad wasn't around when I was growing up. So I was like, I want to be in my kid's life. I was like, the biggest thing I got from my dad, even though he wasn't in my life, was who I didn't want to be to my kids. So I was like, I need to do something different. So I got out of jail. I met my son, Shawn, for the first time. My oldest son, he just turned 21 a couple weeks ago, actually. But the first time I met him was in visitation, right? I was locked up. His mom brought him to see me. He was like, he was just born. So I was like, wow, right? So I was like, I need to do something different. So I got out. I was like, I'm gonna do the 2 jobs thing because I know I need a lot of money. I ended up taking him to the fair when he was I forgot how old he was. I took him to the fair and I was like, I couldn't really do the stuff that I wanted to do because I ain't had no money from the job that I was having. So I was like, I can't do this. So I went back into the streets. But this time with the money I was getting in the streets, I started a record label. I mean, you know, we grew up like in the same era. Master P, we was talking about Jay-Z the other day. So it's like those cats we look up to, they got money in the streets and they started record labels. So that was the route I wanted to go. Yeah, so that kind of led me fast forward into the club scene, doing in the entertainment world, which fast forward led me into which we're gonna get into, I'm sure, the consulting world where we started consulting businesses and so forth, helping them scale to 7 figures and beyond.
Man, listen, you know, I like so much about your story because I think a lot of people listening to this, you know, myself included, we come from so many environments that could have literally just took us completely out of here. And it's like, as you're going through these environments, you do gain a high level of skills. And I think a lot of people sometimes underestimate the skills that they're using, even while they're in those environments and how they can be translated. You know, for me, you know, those skills translated into nightlife, into partying, into promoting. And that's how I got my start into entrepreneurship. And for you, it was more of a connecting the dots to make sure that you never got back, you know, to a place that you didn't want to be at from the very beginning. And I think that's so interesting. And I think that resonates with a lot of people. For someone listening right now, before we get to like all like the client attraction, the whole, you know, stuff that you're doing with many different customers, like for someone listening right now that is still in that environment though, and they have been unable to connect the dots, what would be your advice to helping them see that there could be a new version of themselves?
So great question. I would say if you're in that environment, just really so really looking at like what we can extract from that environment, right? So a lot of times people ask me, they say, "Well, Marquel, what were you able to bring from the streets into legitimate entrepreneurship, right? And like what skills translated?" And I always tell them like all the skills translated, right? So sales skills, marketing skills, branding, right? Like when you're in the hood and it's like you know who on the block got the good and it's going to cost you a little bit more. You know who on the block it might not be as good, but you can get a lot of it for less. Like that's branding, right? That's positioning, right? And everybody kind of know people gonna be talking about your work when you're not in the room. Like all that's branding. So a lot of times people think branding is logos and colors and stuff like that, and that's part of it. But a brand is really what are people saying about you when you're not in the room. So that's the same thing when you're in the streets. Like when people say your name in this hood or that area or whatever, like what is that brand? Do people think you're a thief? Do people think you're dishonest? Do people think you're a stand-up individual? You're gonna stand on business, all those different things. Like, what's that brand? And then you got leadership, depending on how you're moving around. So I was on a podcast a week or so ago, and my man was like, man, I know it probably been challenging to like transition out of that because you probably had bosses to like speak to or whatever. And I was like, nah, bro, I ain't never moved like that. When I was in the streets, I was a boss. So it's like when I moved, when I transitioned out, I ain't had to go get sign off for nobody because I was like calling my own shot. So I already had like leadership skills and I had an organization that was working with me, as not working for me, but working with me because I'm a boss amongst other bosses and leaders, right? And then of course analytics and knowing numbers and all that different type of stuff, like weighing up on the scale, what should it weigh, how do you distribute it? All that is hand in hand in this particular world, right? I'm in legitimate business. You got to know all the analytics and all those different things. And I think one of the beautiful things is from coming from that environment, I played the game at a really high level, and the stakes were very high every single day. So when you come into legitimate business ownership, yes, the stakes are high, but however, you've already built your risk portfolio, right? In the most scariest, treacherous game in the world, right? But so when you come into legitimate business, now a lot of legitimate business, is totally related because a lot of these cats just be talking fast and saying this and saying that, and they just in suits and they just on stages and they just move a little bit different. But a lot of them lack integrity, just like cats in the streets, like some cats in the streets lack integrity. So you're still paying attention, but you got more of a keen awareness of it because you've been in an environment where cats played that game every single day, and cats will be around you every day, acting like they love you, but be the ones that steal from you. So all those skills literally transition. So I think if you're in that environment, just think, okay, what can I pull away from this? And then also those things set you up and give you an unfair advantage when you step into like a legitimate business ownership world, whether that's as an entrepreneur helping somebody else grow their organization, and partnering with them, or as you're like building your own thing as well.
Man, I like that so much because, if you're listening to this right now, if you've been in any of these environments, you've been in any of these situations, you're probably saying, oh, wow, now I can recognize when somebody's doing this, or I can recognize when somebody's doing that. Your senses are a lot heightened, right? Kind of like Peter Parker with spider senses. You kind of know where things are going before they even go down that route. Let's talk about client attraction, because I think it's kind of interesting that, that's something you specialize in, but it helps so many people. And someone right now is listening, and I got my notes, so I'm looking over at some of my notes. And one of the questions that I'm really thinking about is, that I would love to know your answer is, what's the first step? Like what's the first step when someone is thinking about how to build this client attraction system that's not only sustainable, but profitable as well?
Yes, I think the first thing is like understand. A lot of times people think that client attraction is an event. In reality, client attraction is an evolutionary process, right? So here's what I mean. A lot of times people think that they run an ad and then somebody clicks the ad and then somebody makes a purchase decision or somebody books a call. Yes, that does happen. However, you really gotta engineer a marketing ecosystem that actually helps facilitate the client attraction process, right? So I'll give you an example. So Google actually came out with this study recently, and it's called the 7-11-4 rule. So basically, what that means is typically what they're seeing is, and of course we know Google got a ton of data. Basically, what they're saying is a consumer requires 7 hours of content consumed from you, 11 different touch points, and 4 different locations, right? So you have to put a process in place that strategically engineers that. So I give you a real life example. So let's say I go speak at an event. I go speak at an event, and some people in the audience, it's going to be a mixture of people in the audience. Some people in the audience are going to be aware of familiar with me. I would venture to say the majority of the audience isn't familiar with me. So that's going to be their first touch. Typically, when I go speak, it could be I did a 20-minute keynote the other day. Sometimes it can go to like 90 minutes. It just depends. So that's going to be their first awareness. Now, typically, I'm going to give them something away for free, so they can text and receive all these goodies, right? So now they've had their first touch. Then when they text, they're gonna have another touch. Then from there, they're gonna go download all the goodies I've got. They're gonna go check out my Instagram. They're gonna check out my LinkedIn, my YouTube, our strategic scale show. They're gonna see me on your podcast. So all these are different touches. This is the client attraction process in real time because now throughout this process, barriers are being knocked down. They're getting to know you more, and they're moving through the process, right? So it's just like dating, right? And I think that's a perfect example. It's like, hey, you might have saw this person. I know. So I use Atlanta for example. Like Atlanta got a crazy club scene. So you might have seen. Now I give you even a crazier example. I give you a personal example, and I never used this before. So the first time I saw my wife, I was staying on Old National. If you're from Atlanta, you know, or you ain't got to be from Atlanta to know about Old National. So I was on Old National, and I was at the Frozen. I was at the Frozen on Old National. If you're from Atlanta, you know what the Frozen is. So I'm in there. Me and one of my partners, because like you, I used to be in the club promo scene, so I'm always in the club every night. And in Atlanta, the club is popping every night. So I'm in there, and I see my wife. I literally remember it like it was yesterday. Because she used to be a bartender at this other spot, and they wore referee jerseys because it was a sports bar. I mean, referee shirts. So I saw her and I was like, okay, you know what I'm saying? And I like spoke, but it wasn't. That was pretty much it, right? So this was the client attraction process began, right? So me and her chopped it up a little bit, just briefly, not really nothing for real. And then I was at another spot called Central Station, and one of my homies and his girl was there, and he was and she was like, "Hey, my homegirl was asking about you," and I was like, because she kind of saw how I was moving around, and she was like, "Oh, I remember him." So she asked them like, "Who is Buddy?" Right? They asked me, it was like, my girl was asking me about you. And I'm like, who? And they pointed at it, and I'm like, oh, okay. So again, these are different touches. So she's inquiring, seeing what's going on, seeing what's going on. Now, that night, I don't really say nothing because we don't chop it up. I end up at Club Crucial one night, which is T.I.'s club, right? So I'm in there, this on Bankhead. So I'm in there, and I see her, and we end up chopping it up, like having more of a conversation. This one, I'm in the streets at this time, but I got a record label too, right? I got a whole storefront that we turned into a studio, and I used to have business cards, right? I used to have gold business cards, and it said $1 billion enterprises on it. So me and her chop it up. And, most people they're gonna exchange numbers in the phone. So I give her my business card, right? So I'm like, hit me, right? And she looks at it like a business card. I'm like, yeah, like let's lock in, right? So the next day she hit me, and I'm actually living down the street from her because I'm like, she like, yeah, I'm from Old National, blah blah. I'm like, I actually got a spot on Old National. So she pulls up. So I'm explaining this in this way because this is how marketing and sales is done, right? So I saw her, we had these different touch points, and then eventually she pulled up on me. She pulled up on me, and then we started continuing to develop a relationship. And now what? I think 12, 13 years later, we got 5 kids, and we'd have built like an empire together. But that's literally how. But a lot of times people think when people see something, they need to buy in. But it's like, no, it's an evolutionary process because people require touch points, get to know you a little bit better, and you can really automate and engineer this whole process. You can create an automated system that actually does it all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, man. It's powerful. One thing I like about what you said, the 7-11 format that, I've heard of it, never broken down like that. I heard of it with, there's a book I read called Oversubscribed with Daniel Priestley. and he
Yep.
talked
Yep.
about it, and he talked about it, but he kind of breezed past it. You had to kind of go back and listen to it, not like an example of it.
Yep.
And so I like that breakdown, because I know our audience right now is like, all right, 7, 11, 4. You got to have these touch points, these interactions. I think a lot of people right now are always like, yo, buy this, buy my course, or buy this, or buy that. And they haven't even built a relationship with them. To your point, they haven't even dated them yet.
Yep.
And
Yep.
I think that's definitely a crazy, crazy gem. But let's talk about this though, right? You also talk about like a predictable scale. I think about business. I think a lot of business owners right now, people who are out here choosing entrepreneurship, they wish they could predict some of this stuff. They wish they knew exactly what their month would look like. So let's talk about the predictability scale that you have here. For those that are unfamiliar with the term, and I wrote this down, I want you to explain, how could entrepreneurs use predictable scaling to grow their business? But here's the thing, guys. I want to be able to do it without burning out, or without, running from like financial instability.
For sure. So I think one thing to understand is, like, first of all, what does scale mean, right? So a lot of times people think, and I actually mistook this as well. We think that scale means bigger, growing bigger and faster, but in reality, that doesn't, because scale actually means multiplication, replication, right? Are you do you have something in your business that works, right? How can you now replicate that, right? How can you multiply that so you can impact more people, and you can do it in a way where it doesn't break down quality, right? So how can you do that? Now, sometimes people may think that looks like 30, 40, 50 person team. Well, no, in actuality, you can actually scale with a 1 or 2 person team, just depending on, because the goal is to have a lean, self-led team, not just a big team. Because a lot of times we'll try to build a big team just based on ego and stuff like that, right? So it's like, okay, how do can we systemize this? Then how can we replicate it? And then how can we set up for multiplication? And that's really what it boils down to from that particular standpoint. And then also not just obsessing over top line revenue, but actually looking at profit, and more specifically cash flow. Because if somebody was to come in and acquire your business and they want to buy your business, they want to look at current cash flow and they want to look at future cash flow. They're not necessarily going to determine it based on top line revenue. They may look at top line revenue, but actually they're going to look at profit and then cash flow. Moreover, right? So then you want to zoom out and be like, okay, how do I reverse engineer? Well, how do I engineer XYZ cash flow? Like, because for example, it's a difference in having a business that does $1 million in sales. It's a difference in having a business that does $1 million in profit, right? $1 million in revenue, $1 million in collected or contracted, and it's a different in having a business that does $1 million in cash flow, right? So all these things are different things. So really understanding the difference of it, and then getting clear on like what the number is. And let's talk about the burnout thing. So the burnout part is, a lot of times we're out here, and I'm using us because entrepreneurship as a community, a lot of times we're out here chasing arbitrary goals, right? So we're going after these goals simply because somebody else said that that's the goal we should be going after. And that's why we create this predictable scale flywheel. Because oftentimes when I sit down with a business owner and I was okay, what's the revenue target? I was actually talking to a client the other day, and she was like, I want to get to $1 million take home every year. And I was like, all right, cool. Why do you want to get to 1 million take home? And she was like, well, because that's going to help me with my lifestyle, stuff I want to do for my family, and then, charitable contributions. And I was like, all right, cool. Like, have you sat down and actually ran the math on that? Like, got a spreadsheet and everything and did the math. And she was like, no, I actually haven't done the math. And I was like, well, how do you know you actually require $1 million a year take home if you actually haven't done the math? Because you may require less than $1 million take home to accomplish the goal. Because what you want to make take home is now going to dictate what the business has to make. But a lot of times people will create a business goal, what they want to make in the business, and not even consider what they want to take, and not realizing it's two completely different things. So with her, now we zoom out and like, okay, what's the number that you actually want to take home? And then we can figure out, then we can reverse engineer. So now we know, okay, here's what you want to take home while still being a present mother, while still being able to hit the gym, while still being able to watch your favorite shows, while still being able to be to church on Sundays, while still all these things that are important to you outside of the revenue. And now we build a business and the systems around that. And now you can prioritize your personal life and not prioritize the business, because now every decision we're making is focused on moving you closer to this specific outcome versus moving you closer to like doing more and more and more and more, which is just the fastest path to burnout. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think, a lot of people right now, if you're listening, you're paying close attention, what you're listening to right now is you may have a goal set in your mind that you think you need to reach and don't actually need to reach that goal. You have to sit down, to your point, and really truly analyze this in a much more strategic way. A lot of people listening to the show right now, they're either recent college graduates or perhaps, they didn't graduate college at all and they struggle with like execution. And, a lot of times it's tough to kind of get out there and follow through with some of these ideas and some of these game plans that we kind of set out for ourselves. What would be your advice here in terms of identifying what I think is important that you do well, the KPIs, those key performance indicators that they should be paying attention to as they start this new business?
Yeah. So I think when you're starting, when you're starting, I think when it comes, because I know you mentioned people who are so I think it really when you're getting out of the gate, I think the number one KPI is getting clear on like, and it's gonna sound like a little abstract, but I think the number one KPI is getting crystal clear on like what it is that you want, right? Like what is it that you genuinely want, not what society tells that you should want. And then sometimes with social media, it's hard to really get clear on like what it is that you want, because everybody is telling you what you should want. Everybody's telling that you should want your butt to look this way, or that you should want your lips to look this way, or you should drive this type of car, or your body should be built this way. You should live in this type of crib. You shouldn't live in this type of crib. Like everybody's like telling you all these different things, and with all these different voices, a lot of times we got to zoom out and like, all right, what is it that I actually want, right? Because again, I think I said it earlier, but it's this quote I read. It said, life lived based on somebody else's scoreboard is a life not worth living." So I think that's the first thing is like, what do I want? And then really sit down and say, okay, how much do I personally have to make? So that's the second KPI. How much do I personally have to make, right, to hit this particular goal? How much do I personally have to make? And then we can look at, okay, what does the business have to make to hit this goal? So yesterday I did a class. It was called How to Plan Your Life Like a Seven-Figure CEO. And what I talked about on there, I said, one of the things I said is that, all right, once we get clear on what you want, then we can get crystal clear on what we call an MVO, a minimum viable operation. So based on this amount of revenue you want to personally make, how many hours do you want to work per week? Right? And then how many hours do you want to work per week? What's the minimum viable team that you require to actually make that happen? Because one of the metrics I have my clients track is days off. And I know that's and I know that that's totally incongruent to hustle and grind culture, because hustle and grind culture tell you got to hustle and grind every day, you got to put that work in, blah 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 blah. And I'm like, no, that's actually counterintuitive. You actually supposed to have a business that actually runs without you, right? So you actually can take days off and your business still run without you. But again, with hustle and grind culture, we ain't doing that. So we want to figure out, what do we want? Then what do I personally have to take home to afford that lifestyle? And then what does the business have to make? So another example I gave was, um, let's say somebody, you can look at it like, you can make $10 million a year and take home a million, like profit. You can make $5 million a year and get a million profit, or you can make $2 million a year and make a million profit. What do you want? There's no right or wrong answer, right? And there's no better. It really depends on what you want. I got a buddy of mine. They have a company. They do $2 million a year. It's three of them. It's him, his partner, and they have an assistant. He was like, we do a million in profit every year. We have no desire to grow. You get what I'm saying? Now, some people was like, oh man, you supposed to go bigger. You supposed to 10x. You supposed to this. You supposed to this. You supposed to go as big as possible. The magic of thinking big. All these different type of things, and I think those things have their place. depending on who you're speaking to and like what you want. Does that make sense?
Man, it does. What I like about this conversation is that, you define what your success really feels like and what it looks like. To even go even further with this, I thought when I was in the corporate space, my last brand manager job, I was a corporate brand manager for Target, and I left that job over 3 years ago. And I remember, to me, what success at that point looked like was the ability to be able to not have to answer to anybody, not have over 100 people that can reach me at any time, and to be able to operate where I can help my family and to do anything we wanted to do. You want to go to the beach? We can go to the beach. And I think right now, if you're listening to this, you might have, in different points of your life, different levels of what success looks like. Now, being, an entrepreneur full time for over 3 years, success looks way more different than just what that was. And I think that's what we're defining here, because I bet a lot of people listening to you right now, if I had a $2 million business that was profiting 1 million, or if I had a $10 million business that was profiting 1 million, a lot of people probably would take that $2 million business, because you got to think about all the extra stuff that could come with it, the headaches, the hustle, the firing, the talent, so I think that's a huge value add that you're talking about here in educating our audience, man. And I really, really do appreciate you for doing that, because a lot of people right now are watching Instagram, right? They're watching these different things and saying, okay, I should be doing this, or I should be doing that. You also worked with so many like CEOs. I know many CEOs and many founders that work with you. And I'm thinking about, all right, I got you on the podcast, so I'm going to ask you some questions to get an idea that's going to help all of us right now. And that is, what are some of the mistakes that you see some of these founders and these CEOs make early off that could be avoided?
Some people gonna be like, man, this brother keeps saying the same thing. Well, I got to though. I think the number one mistake, because and again, and I want everybody to understand with the stuff that I'm speaking on, I'm speaking from experience. I'm not speaking from a standpoint of like having done the thing, wore the t-shirt. I'm a guy who was addicted to scale and bigger, record breaking month every month. We did an event with 200 people. Now we got to have 400. We did X amount last month. We need to do this amount. We need to double. We need to triple. Blah blah blah. Work. I used to be that guy, right? So I think a big mistake is not being in alignment of like what I actually want. Right. That's number one. First mistake, not being in alignment. What do we actually want? That's number one. Number two, really being clear on like and doing the math, right? So I give you an example. So one of my first goals when I started my business was to retire my wife, right? And the goal I was aiming for was $10,000 a month. That was the holy grail at that point. However, she was a bartender. However, when I sat down and did the numbers though, I realized that I actually didn't even need $10,000 a month to retire her. It was a lot less. Once I sat down and ran our expenses and all that, it was actually about $3,000 or $4,000 a month. That was our expenses at the time, right? But now I was clear I had a clear target, and it wasn't just like an arbitrary number that I was shooting at. So I think sitting down and really understanding that. And then number three is really understanding the difference of being an entrepreneur, a business owner, and a CEO, right? They're all different things. Like an entrepreneur typically runs from a standpoint of like hustle, grind. I can do it. I'm gonna do it all myself. I don't need to create systems. I'm just gonna focus on marketing, sales, marketing, sales, marketing, sales, marketing, sales. A business owner you transition into, all right, I know I can't do it on my own. I know I gotta slow down to speed up. I know a business is a collection of assets. So I got to create assets. These assets are systems and processes and so forth and so on, and team, right? So, and a business owner now zooms out and be like, okay, now I got to put leadership in place and so forth and so on. A CEO, a lot of times people don't understand is that all CEOs aren't even entrepreneurs, right? All CEOs aren't entrepreneurs, and all entrepreneurs aren't CEOs, right? Some entrepreneurs, they'll build a business and then they'll hire a CEO to actually come in and run it, right? So it's all three completely different things, and like really being clear on those things. And then I would say lastly, another mistake I see is entrepreneurs tying their identity into the success or the lack thereof of their business. So for example, they build a company and let's say they get to 3 million a year, for example. And then let's say next year they go through a bad cycle or whatever happens, and now the business takes a hit, and now they do a million that following year, right? They will take oftentimes a personal hit to their identity because their business is having challenges. So they'll see themselves as failing or as an entrepreneur that sucks or a bad CEO or whatever the case may be. And that's not the case. Like your business has an identity and then you have a separate identity. One of the things I learned in therapy is that entrepreneurs can sometimes over index in their identity as a business owner. So now when things aren't going the way they want it in the business owner, as a in business, they'll take it as a personal hit and then that'll actually end up affecting how they show up as a parent or as a husband or as a wife or as a ministry leader or whatever because their identity is tied up into the things. And now again, a lot of that leads to like burnout and stress and anxiety and suicide in some cases that we've seen. We'll be like, man, how did they build all this? And they feel like that seemed like they had everything, but they took themselves out. Why would they do that? Because a lot of times we don't understand like the internal turmoil that entrepreneurs and business owners have. They have no idea um what that can consist of, especially if you don't got like people on your team actually helping you regulate those emotions and those thoughts and all those things that's going on. And then as you're growing, as you mentioned, 10 million a year, 15 million, 20 million a year, that's like the bigger you grow, the more risk you're taking on, the more liability, the more people, the more pressure, all those different things. So as you're doing that, you got to have therapists, you got to have spiritual advisory, you got to have all those things in an advisory board to help you navigate those things. Otherwise, you can implode. And then again, one of these things I heard from my therapist is like, once you got the money figured out, then you stuck with all the problems that money can't solve because money only solves money problems, right? So I think that's another mistake, not having that context early on.
Oh man, absolutely. Because there's always going to be things that you do in life that you appreciate, and I think what we've learned about money is that money comes and goes. And a lot of the things that you spoke on, that I think truly define you is core values on how you live your life every day. Right, your biggest aha for you that I can tell motivates a lot of your movement is family, is the wife, it is the kids, and that's like a complete 180 prior to what it was for you 20 years ago, right? So
100%.
there's so much to learn from this. A lot of people they talk about like these flywheels, and this is a lot of like business context, and a lot of people sometimes don't understand it. And I wrote down something to ask you this question because I think you probably break down flywheels a lot more simpler than what you'll find on YouTube. So I want to ask you this. Can you give us like a practical like example of how someone just starting out could build like their own flywheel so they can have a consistent momentum in their business?
Yeah. For sure. So I think so. The first thing when somebody's starting out brand new, right? The first focus of somebody starting out brand new is sales, right? Sales. That's it. A lot of times people will spend time they're building a website. They're trying to do all the get business cards. They're doing logos, all those different things. Like focus on getting your first 10 sales. Not only getting your first 10 sales, but actually getting and serving 10 new customers or clients, your first 10. And then from there, you can actually begin to now from there, that's the first piece of your flywheel, right? Serving and getting your first 10 people. And then from there, you can start looking at, okay, when this customer bought, what happened? Like, or what should have happened? Like, how did they get delivered? So let's just say, I want to keep this general for any type of business, but let's say, okay, they bought from your website or they bought from in front of you or however, what happened? Like, did they get an onboarding email? Did that lead to an onboarding call? Like, what did that process look like? Because now you want to start looking at like systemizing what happened. Because now when you systemize what happened, then you can create like a system for actual customer and client acquisition. The first thing you want to do is sell 10 people. Like you don't if you're starting out brand new, you don't even got to figure out how do I start a podcast or how do I create ads or how do I create no, it's like start reaching out to people, right? And get people to buy because now you can see if you have something that people actually spend their money on. Because a lot of people will tell you, you have friends and family, they be like, hey man, that's a great idea. Hey, you should do this. Hey, you should do that. But it's like they won't buy though, right? People will give you all these opinions, but it's like, have they proving to you that this is great with their car or with their cash. Once you sell and serve 10 people, now you start looking at, okay, how do I systemize the marketing of this and the selling of this? And then how do I systemize the delivery of this? So I would say to keep this super simple, that's one, because now when you develop these systems and these processes, now when you begin to hire your first person, you can actually plug them into a system that you've already designed by doing it multiple times over and over and over again. Does that make
Man,
sense?
it does. You know, I'm glad you broke it down like that because a lot of people right now are like, "Oh, I need to do this. I need to do that." Like, this might be literally the one episode you need to start.
Yep.
Start in a very
100%.
strategically way that's going to help you in so many different ways. I want to ask you. I got two more questions I got to ask you because I know you're really good at this. A lot of people do sales. A lot of people sell in ways where it comes off overly salesy. You know, what's your advice to avoid doing things like that?
I believe the best way to sell. So we have this process as part of our Predictable Scale Flywheel. It's called the effortless enrollment system. So if you listen to this, I want you to write down: great marketing makes selling unnecessary. So when your marketing is on, like when we in the hood, right? They say, and even in trap music, like good dope sells itself, right? So it's like when your marketing is on point, people come to you and they sell you on why you should allow them to buy. Versus you, I'm gonna say it again. I'm gonna slow that down. People will come to you and they will sell you on why you should allow them to buy versus you selling them on why they should buy. So I'm gonna give you an analogy. So I look at golf like marketing and sales. Even if you don't play golf or you don't like golf, you'll get the analogy. So it's like if Tiger Woods comes out, he's gonna come out with a driver. And the goal of that driver, that's the club he has, is to get the ball as close to the hole as possible. So in business, the driver is marketing, the ball is the prospect, the potential buyer, and then the hole is to sell. So you want to get the ball, the prospect as close to the sale as possible. So they've gone through your 7-Eleven 4. They've gone through your different touch points. So now when it comes down to make a buying decision, all you're doing is asking questions. It's called consultative selling. You're saying, okay, what happened recently in your life that made you interested in this? So let's say, for example, let's say I'm selling a podcast service. All right, for example. All right, well, cool. What happened recently in your life that made you want to, launch this podcast? Oh, this I got a business. I'm looking to get more sales. All right, cool. What else have you tried to get sales? I tried this, blah, blah, blah. Cool. Have you tried to do a podcast before? Well, no, well, I have, but this haven't heard. Okay, cool. So I'm just kind of asking a series of questions because I want to get clear on like where they are, and I want to get clear on where they want to go, and want to figure out what's that gap, because the sale is made in the gap. And when you ask enough questions and you really get down to the bottom of it, now it's simple as, all right, cool. Well, based on what I'm hearing, you're here. Here's where you're looking to get to, and you give them a full recap. And it's like, okay, this definitely sounds like something I can help with. If that's 100% true, then you say that. If you can't help them, then you say, well, I don't sound like it'll be a good fit, and then you operate out of integrity. But if you can in fact help, then it's like, all right, cool, I can definitely help. Would you like me to tell you about how we can help? And they're like, absolutely. And then you tell them about how you can help. And they're like, well, cool. What? How much is it? And then you figure out the financial stuff. But you literally just ask questions and be genuine curious, versus making a lot of statements trying to lean in and make a sale.
Oh, that's powerful because you want to get to know who you're about to do business with. Yo, I hope you guys are writing this down. I hope you guys are getting so much knowledge from this. I got to ask you the question we ask every person who's ever been on this podcast. Whether you are about to walk across that stage, grab that degree, or perhaps you have no degree at all, but you're asking yourself the question of the show: school's over, now what? What advice would Marquel Russell give?
School's over, now what? I would say school is over, now what? The answer to that is school is just beginning. So it's like it's levels to it. You literally never stop learning. You never stop growing. So I think in traditional school, right, you get all the lessons and then you get a test, right? I think in real world school, every day you're getting tests and then you get the lessons. So I give you a great example of this. So this morning I was talking to my 11-year-old before he went to school, and he's a hard charger. He's hard on himself. He likes to learn. He's always been gifted and learns really fast and can do stuff easily. So anytime something is a challenge for him, it really bothers him. So this morning, I forget what we were talking about. And I was like, we started talking about grades. And I was like, well, if you don't get the grades you want, what does that mean? And he was like, that I didn't do good. And I was like, well, that's what school would say. I was like, well, in reality, if you don't get the grade you want or you don't get the result you want in anything, that doesn't mean you didn't do good. That simply means there's something to learn, or there's an opportunity to learn and there's an opportunity to grow. And every day when you approach life like that, instead of saying, "Oh man, I didn't do good that," or "Oh man, I took an L there," you can just reframe that and say, "This is an opportunity to learn. This is an opportunity to grow." Because in school tells us that consuming information is learning. In reality, you don't learn anything until you implement. So you've watched this whole podcast, you didn't learn anything, right? Until you take something from this episode and then you go implement it into your life. And then the data that you get from that, that's when you actually learn. Other than that, you just consuming information. So in real life, you actually getting the test. And then from those tests, you get the lessons.
Oh man, listen, man, you heard it first, man. You're getting the tests, you're getting the lessons. Yo, this has been a phenomenal episode, man. I appreciate you for being on the podcast. Right now, audience want to learn more about you. They probably already went through the show notes. They probably already clicked the profile, already hit that follow button. But just give our audience exactly where they can find you.
Yeah, so I put together a page with like some cool gifts. So if you go to scalemadeeasy.com, so just scale, SCALE, made, MADEEASY.com. Go to scalemadeeasy.com. I got a ton of resources for you over there that you can dive into and start implementing into your business. And then also, whatever your favorite platform is, whether that's Instagram, connect with me on Instagram, shoot me a DM, let me know you was on here. Let's connect. But again, I got a ton of resources right on scalemadeeasy.com where you can go dive in and start getting access to all the tools and resources that you require to build a business that's more profitable, more scalable, more sustainable, more enjoyable, and potentially sellable if you desire to sell it in the future.
Man, this has been phenomenal. For those that have been listening, I want you to always remember, dream it, believe it, go out and get it. We'll see you next week. Yo, what you think? I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I want to know what you learned. So if you wouldn't mind, would you take a screenshot of you listening to the podcast on your phone right now? Upload to your Instagram stories, tag me at Shawn R. Anthony _, and then let me know in that Instagram story what is one thing that you learned. I love hearing from you, my listeners, thought leaders, former or current students all around the world. Let me know, and while you're doing this, go inside the podcast app, subscribe, leave a 5-star review and a 5-star rating. Again, this helps us reach more people. And if you want to be a part of this mission, helping us change the world one person at a time, it makes a massive difference by you leaving a review. Thanks so much. I'll see you next week. And remember, dream it, believe it, go out and get it.